Brighton Medical Center, a symbol of excellence nestled in a wealthy suburban community, was on the verge of facing an unexpected shift. When Maya Grant, a skilled black nurse, joined the team, she anticipated a smooth start but was unaware of the latent biases she would encounter. As tensions built and small conflicts surfaced, a seemingly ordinary patient named Robert Hale lay silently observing from his hospital bed. Yet, Mr. Hale was no typical patient, and his presence was about to turn everything upside down. What hidden influence did this mysterious man possess? And how might one nurse's silent battle ignite change within an entire institution? Let's find out. But before we dive into the full story, drop a comment below letting us know where you're tuning in from. And if you're captivated by tales of courage and justice, be sure to subscribe for more stories like this one. The pristine corridors of Brighton Medical Center gleamed under the fluorescent lights as Maya Grant took her first steps inside. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled the air, along with a subtle tension that made her feel uneasy. Despite her nerves, Maya took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked confidently toward the nurse's station. As she approached, she noticed conversations dropping to whispers, with people casting furtive glances her way and quickly looking away. "Excuse me," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm Maya Grant, the new nurse. Could you point me to the head nurse's office?" A blonde nurse looked up, her blue eyes briefly widening before she offered a practiced but somewhat distant smile. "Of course," she replied, voice polite yet reserved. "Down the hall, third door on the right." Maya nodded, thanked her, and made her way down the hallway, all too aware of the eyes following her every step. The click of her shoes seemed to echo loudly in the silence, each step amplifying the surreal stillness around her. Just as she neared the office, a tall, authoritative man in a white coat emerged from a room, his salt-and-pepper hair and stern demeanor marking him as a senior doctor. Maya felt a flutter of hope. Maybe this was her chance to make a positive first impression. "Good morning, doctor," she greeted him with a warm smile, extending her hand. "I'm Maya Grant, the new nurse. It's a pleasure to meet you." The doctor's cold gray eyes appraised her for a moment before he replied curtly, "Dr. Samuel Roberts, I trust you're well aware of our high standards here at Brighton Medical Center. I hope you're prepared to meet them." "You've been properly oriented to our protocols?" Dr. Roberts asked, his tone more statement than question. Before Maya could respond, he continued, "We maintain exceptionally high standards here at Brighton Medical Center. I trust you're ready to meet them." Without waiting for her reply, he brushed past her, leaving Maya standing in the hallway, her hand slowly falling to her side. The interaction left her feeling slightly deflated, but Maya refused to let it discourage her. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and knocked on the head nurse's door. As she waited for a response, Maya's thoughts drifted back to her days in nursing school and the words of her mother, who had always been a mixture of pride and cautious concern. "Sweetheart," her mother had often reminded her, "you'll have to work twice as hard as everyone else. But don't ever let them see you sweat. You come from a long line of strong women, and that same strength is in you." Maya remembered the late nights studying, the countless extra hours in the lab, and the constant pressure to prove herself. She recalled the subtle dismissals from some professors, the raised eyebrows when she scored highly, and the whispered comments from classmates questioning if she truly belonged. But Maya had persevered, graduating at the top of her class, her skill and determination silencing even her harshest critics. The door opened, revealing a middle-aged woman with a stern expression. "Miss Grant, I presume?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Come in, we have a lot to cover and I expect you to keep up." As Maya followed the head nurse into her office, she felt as though she were stepping into more than just a new job. The entire hospital seemed charged with an underlying tension, a silent storm brewing beneath the surface of polite smiles and professional demeanor. Little did Maya know that her presence here would soon serve as the catalyst for much-needed change, one that would challenge entrenched biases and expose the toxic culture hiding behind Brighton's prestigious reputation. Her first day continued in a blur of orientations, brief introductions, and piles of paperwork. As she moved through the hospital, Maya couldn't ignore the subtle ways she was excluded. Conversations would fall silent as she approached, only to resume in hushed whispers once she passed. Maya's attempts to make small talk with her fellow nurses were met with polite but distant responses, leaving her feeling like an outsider in what should have been a welcoming, collaborative environment. By the time her shift ended, Maya was mentally and emotionally drained. As she gathered her things from her locker, she overheard two nurses whispering around the corner. "Did you see the new hire?" One whispered. "Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking," the other replied. "Not exactly the neighborhood for, you know." Maya's hand froze on her locker door, her heart sinking. She had hoped the coldness was just first-day jitters, but now the reality of her situation became painfully clear. This wasn't just a new job. It was going to be a daily struggle against prejudice and stereotypes. As Maya left the hospital, the weight of the day bore heavily on her shoulders. The excitement she had felt that morning was now overshadowed by a nagging sense of doubt and isolation. She made her way to the bus stop, her mind swirling with emotions. Sitting on the hard plastic bench, she pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. After 2 rings, her mother's warm, comforting voice answered. "Hey, sweetheart. How was your first day?" At the sound of her mother's voice, Maya felt tears prick her eyes. She took a shaky breath, determined not to break down in public. "It was challenging, Mama," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. After a moment of silence, her mother's voice came through the line, filled with understanding and strength. "Maya Grace Grant, listen to me. You've worked too hard to let anyone make you feel less than. Remember who you are and where you come from. You're not there just for yourself. You're there for every little black girl who dreams of being in those halls one day." Maya closed her eyes, letting her mother's words soothe her. "I know, Mama. It's just, I didn't expect it to be this hard." "Nothing worth doing is ever easy, baby," her mother replied, "but you've got the strength of generations behind you. Hold your head high, do your job better than anyone else, and don't you dare let them see you falter. You hear me?" "Yes, Mama," Maya said, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "I hear you." As she ended the call, Maya noticed a sleek black Mercedes slowing down as it passed the bus stop. Through the tinted window, she glimpsed Dr. Roberts, his eyes locking onto hers for a moment before the car sped away. Squaring her shoulders, Maya felt her mother's words settle within her. She may be facing an uphill battle, but she was far from alone. With her mother's words echoing in her mind, Maya reminded herself that although she faced a daunting path, she wasn't alone. Supported by the strength of her family and her own determination to prove herself, Maya knew she could face whatever challenges Brighton Medical Center would throw her way. As the bus arrived, she stood tall, ready to take on another day. Little did she know, her presence at Brighton would soon set off a series of events that would challenge the hospital's culture, revealing deep-seated prejudices and initiating long-overdue change. The weeks that followed unfolded like a slow-burning fuse. Each day seemed to add another layer of tension to Maya Grant's already challenging work environment. The initial coolness she'd experienced on her first day began to shift into a more insidious kind of exclusion, subtle but impossible to ignore. During her morning rounds, Maya noticed stark differences in how she was treated compared to her white colleagues. Dr. Samuel Roberts, in particular, seemed to derive some twisted satisfaction in finding faults with her work, no matter how diligently she carried out her duties. "Nurse Grant," Dr. Roberts called out one morning, his voice slicing through the busy nurses' station. "I trust you've familiarized yourself with our protocols by now. We can't afford any mistakes." His emphasis on mistakes sent a chill down Maya's spine. She held his gaze firmly, refusing to be intimidated. "Of course, Dr. Roberts," she replied, her tone steady. "I assure you I'm fully versed in all hospital procedures." Dr. Roberts raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "We'll see about that, won't we? Let's hope you've learned everything you need to here." His condescending tone wasn't lost on Maya, or on the other nurses who pretended to be busy while obviously eavesdropping. As Dr. Roberts walked away, Maya could feel the weight of unspoken judgments pressing down on her. Throughout the day, she found herself assigned the most challenging and unpleasant tasks, while her white colleagues handled relatively straightforward cases. More than once, Maya was assigned the most difficult patients and complex procedures. "Maya, would you mind taking Mr. Hudson in room 305? A fellow nurse asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "He's been a bit challenging today." Maya nodded, though she knew challenging was an understatement. Mr. Hudson was notorious for his racist outbursts, and he had already reduced 2 nurses to tears that week. Nevertheless, Maya approached the task with professionalism, determined to prove her resilience amidst the growing trials she faced. Mr. Hudson had already reduced 2 nurses to tears that week with his angry outbursts, yet Maya approached his case with steady professionalism, determined to prove her worth. As she entered his room, bracing herself for the inevitable barrage of insults, she couldn't help but wonder if this assignment was just another test of her resilience, or, worse, a setup for failure. "What are you doing here?" Mr. Hudson spat the moment he saw her. "I told them I don't want any colored nurse touching me." Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself against the hateful words. "Mr. Hudson, I'm here to check your vitals and change your dressing," she replied, calm and composed. "I assure you, I am fully qualified to provide your care." As she worked, enduring a constant stream of slurs and insults, Maya maintained her professionalism. She completed her tasks with care and precision, refusing to let Mr. Hudson's bigotry diminish her work quality. When she finally emerged from the room, she found Dr. Roberts waiting in the hallway, a look of feigned concern on his face. "Everything all right in there, Nurse Grant?" he asked, his voice overly polite. "We heard quite the commotion." Maya met his gaze, her expression steady. "Mr. Hudson's vitals are stable, and his dressing has been changed. Is there anything else you need from me, Dr. Roberts?" For a moment, a flicker of surprise crossed Dr. Roberts's face, quickly replaced by his usual mask of condescension. "Well, let's hope you can keep up that level of composure with all your patients. We wouldn't want any complaints now, would we?" As Dr. Roberts walked away, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she had just passed some sort of twisted test, one she should never have been subjected to in the first place. The rest of her shift was a blur of endless tasks and subtle slights. Maya found herself constantly double-checking her work, not because she doubted her abilities, but because she knew that even the smallest mistake would be magnified and used against her. As the day went on, Maya couldn't help but notice how her white colleagues breezed through their shifts, chatting and laughing while she labored under a heavier workload. The disparity was glaring. Each time she considered speaking up, her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Don't you dare let them see you falter." By the end of her shift, Maya was physically and emotionally drained. As she gathered her things from her locker, she overheard 2 nurses whispering nearby. "Can you believe they're making such a fuss about these diversity hires?" one said, her tone laced with disdain. "Such a big deal about diversity hires," one nurse sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's not like they can keep up with the rest of us anyway." Maya's hand froze on her locker door, her heart pounding. She wanted more than anything to confront them, to defend herself and her abilities, but she knew any confrontation would only deepen their biases. Instead, she quietly closed her locker, holding her head high as she left the hospital, despite the weight of the day pressing heavily on her shoulders. As Maya waited at the bus stop, the same sleek black Mercedes she'd seen before pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing Dr. Roberts behind the wheel. "Nurse Grant," he called out, his voice tinged with false concern. "Waiting for the bus again? Such a shame. I suppose that's all one can afford on a nurse's salary, isn't it?" Before Maya could respond, Dr. Roberts sped away, leaving her standing there, feeling humiliated and angry. His casual cruelty cut deeply, a harsh reminder of the uphill battle she faced daily at Brighton. As she boarded the bus, Maya's mind churned with emotions. The hope and excitement she'd felt on her first day seemed like a distant memory, now overshadowed by the grim determination to survive in such a hostile environment. Yet, even as she grappled with the events of the day, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that something had to give. The question was, would she be the one to break under the constant pressure, or would her perseverance finally force a change in Brighton's toxic culture? Little did Maya know that an unexpected ally was about to enter her life, someone who would help tip the scales in her favor and bring long-hidden prejudices within Brighton Medical Center to light. As the bus rumbled through the dark streets, Maya closed her eyes, drawing strength from her mother's words and the legacy of resilience running through her veins. Tomorrow would be another battle, but she was determined to face it head-on, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Maya arrived at Brighton with a renewed sense of purpose. She'd spent the night reflecting on her experiences and reminding herself why she'd chosen to become a nurse in the first place. To help people, regardless of her background or the personal obstacles in her path. As Maya entered Brighton Medical Center that morning, she noticed a distinct buzz of activity. Nurses were hurriedly preparing a room, and there was an air of anticipation that she hadn't felt before. "What's going on?" Maya asked a colleague, her curiosity piqued. Momentarily forgetting her usual cool demeanor towards Maya, the nurse replied excitedly, "We've got a VIP patient coming in, some big shot who had a skiing accident, both arms broken, from what I heard." Before Maya could ask more, Dr. Roberts appeared, his expression stern. "Nurse Grant," he said, his tone brisk, "I need you to handle the new admission in room 412, Mr. Robert Hale. He's had a severe skiing accident with both arms broken. I expect you to provide him with the utmost care and attention." Maya nodded, recognizing the assignment for what it was, another test. "Of course, Dr. Roberts, I'll see to it immediately." As she made her way to room 412, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment felt different. The air of importance surrounding this particular patient made her wonder if there was more to the situation than met the eye. Entering the room, Maya was greeted by the sight of a middle-aged man lying in bed, both arms encased in casts. Despite his injuries, there was a quiet authority about him that she noticed immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said, approaching with a warm smile. "I'm Nurse Maya Grant, and I'll be taking care of you during your stay with us." Mr. Hale looked up, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Good morning, Nurse Grant," he replied, his voice surprisingly strong given his condition. "Thank you for your help. I must say, I didn't expect my skiing accident would land me here." As Maya began checking his vitals and assessing his condition, she couldn't help but notice how Mr. Hale observed her every move with keen interest. Unlike many other patients, his gaze held no prejudice, only a thoughtful curiosity. "You seem very competent, Nurse Grant," Mr. Hale commented as she adjusted his IV. "How long have you been working at Brighton?" Maya paused, caught off guard by the genuine interest in his tone. "I've been here for a few weeks now, sir," she replied cautiously. "It's been quite an experience so far." Mr. Hale raised an eyebrow, catching the undertone of her words. "I see," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "And is the hospital living up to its prestigious reputation?" Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Roberts, who burst into the room with a cheeriness Maya had never seen him display. "Mr. Hale," he exclaimed, his voice dripping with forced warmth. "I trust Nurse Grant has been taking excellent care of you. We only assign our best staff to our most distinguished patients." Maya worked to keep her expression neutral, knowing full well that Dr. Roberts had never shown her this kind of confidence before. Mr. Hale, however, seemed to pick up on the inconsistency. "Indeed, Dr. Roberts," he replied, his gaze shifting between the doctor and Maya. "Nurse Grant has been exemplary. We were just discussing her experiences here at Brighton." Dr. Roberts's smile faltered momentarily before he recovered. "Well, I'm sure she'll tell you it's been nothing short of excellent. We pride ourselves on our inclusive and supportive environment here at Brighton." Maya felt a wave of anger at Dr. Roberts' blatant hypocrisy, but maintained her professionalism. Mr. Hale, however, appeared to sense the underlying tension. "Is that so?" he mused, his eyes fixed on Maya's face. "Well, I look forward to experiencing this supportive environment firsthand during my stay." As Dr. Roberts launched into a detailed explanation of Mr. Hale's treatment plan, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. The way Mr. Hale had looked at her, the pointed nature of his questions, it was as if he were seeing through Brighton's polished facade to something deeper. Over the next few days, Maya spent more time with Mr. Hale than any other patient. Despite his injuries, he was alert and inquisitive, often asking her questions about her background and experiences. Unlike many patients and even some staff members, he seemed genuinely interested in her responses, never showing a hint of the prejudice she had come to expect. One afternoon, as Maya was carefully changing Mr. Hale's bandages, she overheard a conversation outside the door that made her blood run cold. "I don't care what Dr. Roberts says," a nurse's voice hissed. "I don't trust that Grant woman with our VIP patient. Who knows what she might do?" "I know," agreed another voice, "but we can't say anything. They'll just accuse us of being racist." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she finished her task, the weight of the constant suspicion and mistrust bearing down on her. Mr. Hale, always observant, noticed her distress. "Is everything all right, Nurse Grant?" he asked, his voice gentle but probing. "Is everything all right, Nurse Grant?" Mr. Hale asked, his voice gentle yet probing. Maya forced a smile. "Of course, Mr. Hale. Just making sure these bandages are just right." Mr. Hale fell silent, his eyes studying her face intently. "You know," he said finally, "I've always believed a person's true character is revealed not by how they treat their superiors, but by how they treat those they consider beneath them." Maya looked up, surprised by the pointed nature of his comment. Mr. Hale held her gaze, a knowing look in his eyes. "I've seen a lot in my time, Nurse Grant, and from this bed, I can tell you, the view has been quite enlightening." Before Maya could respond, Dr. Roberts entered the room, cutting their conversation short. As she left, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Hale was more than just a VIP patient. His words and actions hinted at a deeper awareness of the dynamics at Brighton Medical Center. And for the first time since starting there, she felt a small glimmer of hope. Little did Maya know that Mr. Hale's presence was about to initiate a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of Brighton Medical Center, bringing to light long-buried prejudices. However, as the days went by, Maya found herself increasingly isolated. What had once been a cold atmosphere of indifference from her colleagues had morphed into outright hostility, with pointed glares and whispered comments following her every move. Emboldened by the lack of consequences, Dr. Roberts became more overt in his attempts to undermine her. One morning, as Maya was reviewing patient charts at the nurse's station, he approached her with a stack of files. "Nurse Grant," he said, his tone dripping with insincere concern, "I need you to handle these cases today. They're particularly challenging, but I trust you're up to the task." Maya looked at the pile, recognizing it as nearly double the workload given to her colleagues. She met Dr. Roberts' gaze steadily, refusing to show any hint of intimidation. "Of course, Dr. Roberts. I'll take care of it right away." As Dr. Roberts walked away, a smirk played at the corners of his mouth. Maya heard him mutter under his breath, "Let's see how she handles this." Throughout the day, Maya found herself running from one challenging case to another, barely able to catch her breath. The patients assigned to her were some of the most demanding in the hospital, many with complex medical needs or difficult personalities. Despite the overwhelming workload, she approached each case with the same diligence and professionalism, determined not to let the pressure break her. Despite the unrelenting workload, Maya refused to let her standards slip, approaching each patient with the same level of care and professionalism, even as exhaustion began to weigh on her. However, the constant pressure took a toll on her, both physically and emotionally. As she hurried to respond to yet another call, she overheard two colleagues whispering nearby. "Can you believe they're letting her handle all these critical cases?" One nurse sneered, her tone laced with disdain. "It's like they're just waiting for her to mess up." "I know," replied another, "but you have to admit, it's impressive how she keeps going." "I would have cracked by now." Maya felt a mixture of anger and hurt wash over her. It stung to realize that her colleagues were not only aware of the unfair treatment, but were actively watching to see if she would fail. The burden of carrying on under such scrutiny was almost unbearable. As the day wore on, Maya found herself making more frequent trips to Mr. Hale's room. Unlike the rest of the hospital, his room had become something of a sanctuary for her, a place where if only for a moment she felt genuinely seen and appreciated. "Nurse Grant," Mr. Hale greeted her as she entered his room for a routine check. "You look exhausted. Is everything all right?" Maya managed a weak smile. "Just a busy day, Mr. Hale. Nothing I can't handle." Mr. Hale studied her face, concern evident in his eyes. "You know," he said carefully, "there's a difference between handling something and truly thriving. From what I've observed, you're more than capable of the latter." His words, though gentle, highlighted the stark contrast between how Mr. Hale treated her and the attitude she faced from the rest of the staff. Maya felt a lump form in her throat, the weight of her isolation pressing heavily on her. "Thank you, Mr. Hale," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "I appreciate your kindness." As she turned to leave, Mr. Hale called out to her, his voice filled with quiet authority that made her pause. "Nurse Grant," he said, "remember, sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to speak up." Maya left the room, her mind whirling with the implications of Mr. Hale's words. As she returned to the nurse's station, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Little did she know that the following day would bring a series of events that would push her to her limits and force a confrontation that had been brewing since her first day at Brighton Medical Center. The next day, Maya arrived at Brighton Medical Center to find the hospital in a state of heightened activity. Rumors swirled about a high-stakes emergency surgery scheduled for later, with several hospital board members and important visitors expected to observe. As she began her rounds, Maya noticed a palpable tension in the air. Nurses and doctors alike seemed on edge, the pressure of the upcoming operation weighing on everyone's minds. Midway through her morning duties, Dr. Roberts approached her, a glint in his eye that immediately put her on guard. "Nurse Grant," he said, his tone carefully neutral, "we need you to assist in the emergency operation this afternoon. It's a critical case. I trust you're prepared to handle it." Maya felt a mixture of surprise and suspicion. Being chosen to assist in such a high-profile operation was usually an honor, but considering it was Dr. Roberts who'd selected her, she couldn't help but wonder if there was an ulterior motive. "Of course, Dr. Roberts," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'll be ready." As Dr. Roberts walked away, Maya overheard him muttering to another doctor, "Let's see how she handles the pressure. This should be interesting." The hours leading up to the operation were a blur of preparation and anticipation. Maya threw herself into her work, double and triple checking everything to ensure she was prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. As she scrubbed in for surgery, she couldn't help but notice the skeptical looks from some of the other staff members. Taking a deep breath, she steeled herself, her mother's words echoing in her mind, "Don't you dare let them see you falter." The operation began, and Maya found herself working alongside Dr. Roberts and several senior staff members. The tension in the room was palpable, the presence of important observers adding to the pressure. Despite the challenging circumstances, Maya remained focused, her movements precise and efficient. She anticipated the surgeon's needs, handing them instruments before they even had to ask, her years of training and experience shining through. However, as the operation progressed, Maya noticed something that made her heart race. Dr. Roberts, usually so confident, seemed to hesitate. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared to make a critical incision. In that split second, Maya realized that Dr. Roberts was about to make a potentially life-threatening mistake. Seeing the potential danger, Maya didn't hesitate. "Dr. Roberts," she said, her voice clear and steady, "perhaps we should consider approaching from a different angle. The patient's anatomy suggests it might be safer." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Dr. Roberts looked at her, a mix of surprise and anger flashing across his face. For a moment, Maya thought he would dismiss her suggestion outright. But then, almost imperceptibly, Dr. Roberts gave a brief nod and adjusted his approach, following Maya's advice. As the operation continued, it became apparent that her intervention had likely saved the patient's life. When the surgery concluded successfully, Maya could feel the weight of many eyes upon her. Some looked at her with newfound respect, while others, including Dr. Roberts, seemed to be seething with barely contained resentment. As they began to clean up, Dr. Roberts turned to Maya, his voice low and menacing. "Nurse Grant, I need to see you in private. Immediately." Maya followed Dr. Roberts out of the operating room, her heart pounding. She knew she had done the right thing by speaking up, but she also knew this might cost her dearly. They entered a private room, and to her surprise, Maya realized it was Mr. Hale's room. She had forgotten he was still in the hospital. Dr. Roberts, however, seemed too furious to notice or care about their location. As soon as the door closed behind them, he rounded on Maya, his face flushed with anger. "How dare you question my judgment in there?" he hissed, his voice laced with venom. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? You're lucky I don't have you fired on the spot for that kind of insubordination." Maya held her ground, her voice calm but firm. "Dr. Roberts, I was simply doing my job. The patient's safety. Your job." Dr. Roberts interrupted, his voice rising. "Your job is to follow orders, not to think you know better than your superiors. This is exactly why people like you don't belong in a prestigious institution like Brighton Medical Center. You're here because of some misguided attempt at diversity, not because of any real skill or knowledge." As Dr. Roberts continued, his tirade grew increasingly hostile, his words becoming openly racist. Maya felt a mix of anger and despair wash over her. All the microaggressions, the slights, the endless pressure, all of it paled in comparison to this blatant display of prejudice. Just as Maya was about to respond, a calm voice cut through the room, stopping Dr. Roberts mid-sentence. "Dr. Roberts," Mr. Hale said, his tone filled with quiet authority. "I believe you've forgotten where you are and who you're speaking to." Mr. Hale's voice held a quiet authority that neither Maya nor Dr. Roberts had heard before. Both turned, startled, to see Mr. Hale sitting up in his bed, his face controlled yet radiating anger. "Mr. Hale," Dr. Roberts stammered, his face paling as he realized the gravity of his mistake. I didn't realize you were awake. I apologize for disturbing you." "Oh, I'm very much awake, Dr. Roberts," Mr. Hale replied, his eyes narrowing. "And I've been awake for quite some time, long enough to witness the disgraceful way you and others in this hospital have been treating Nurse Grant." Maya stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. Mr. Hale, the quiet and seemingly unassuming patient, was suddenly exuding an aura of power and authority that filled the room. "Mr. Hale," Dr. Roberts began, his voice trembling slightly, "I assure you there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Mr. Hale cut him off sharply. "What I've witnessed during my stay here is a clear pattern of discrimination and harassment, and it ends now." As Mr. Hale spoke, the realization dawned on both Maya and Dr. Roberts that he was far more than just a VIP patient. The authority in his voice, the way he carried himself, it was clear Mr. Hale wielded significant power. Who are you?" Dr. Roberts asked, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Mr. Hale gave a thin, humorless smile. "Someone who has the power to make or break this hospital's future. And right now, Dr. Roberts, I'm not feeling inclined to support an institution that allows such blatant racism and unprofessional behavior." As the gravity of the situation sank in, Maya felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Relief that someone had finally witnessed and acknowledged the treatment she had been enduring, anger at the injustice, and a glimmer of hope that maybe, at last, things might change. Little did any of them know, this confrontation was about to set in motion a chain of events that would shake Brighton Medical Center to its core, forcing long-hidden prejudices into the light and sparking an overdue reckoning. The tension in Mr. Hale's room was palpable as the full weight of his words sank in. Dr. Roberts, his face ashen, struggled to regain his composure. Mr. Hale, now fully sitting up in his bed, fixed Dr. Roberts with a steely gaze. "I think it's time we had a frank discussion about the culture of this hospital," he said, his voice firm and unyielding. "About the culture of this hospital, don't you think?" Mr. Hale continued, his voice unwavering. But before Dr. Roberts could respond, there was a knock at the door. A nervous-looking nurse poked her head in. "Dr. Roberts, the hospital administrator is looking for you. It's urgent." Dr. Roberts glanced between Mr. Hale and the nurse, visibly torn. Finally, he nodded stiffly. "We'll continue this discussion later, Mr. Hale. Nurse Grant, you're dismissed for now." As Dr. Roberts hurried out of the room, Maya found herself alone with Mr. Hale. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "Nurse Grant," Mr. Hale finally said, his voice gentler. "I think it's time I properly introduced myself. My name is Robert Hale, and I'm the CEO of Healthcare United, one of the largest healthcare conglomerates in the country." Maya's eyes widened in shock. Healthcare United was a powerhouse in the medical world, known for its vast influence and resources. Suddenly, Mr. Hale's earlier comments about having the power to make or break the hospital made perfect sense. "Mr. Hale," Maya began, uncertain of what to say. "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair beside his bed. "I think we have a lot to discuss." Over the next hour, Mr. Hale revealed that although his stay at Brighton Medical Center had been unplanned, it had opened his eyes to the issues festering within the hospital. "I came here as a patient, expecting nothing more than quality medical care," Mr. Hale explained. "Instead, I've witnessed a culture of discrimination and unprofessionalism that goes against everything I believe in as a healthcare leader." He described how he had observed both subtle and blatant discrimination against her, the microaggressions and the toxic culture that seemed to permeate the hospital. "Your experience, Nurse Grant, is unfortunately not unique," Mr. Hale said, his voice filled with anger and determination. "But it is unacceptable, and it ends now." As they talked, Maya felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. For the first time since she had started at Brighton, she felt truly seen and heard. Mr. Hale listened intently as she shared her experiences, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. "Thank you for your honesty, Nurse Grant," Mr. Hale said when she finished. "Your resilience in the face of such adversity is commendable, but it's time for systemic change, not just individual perseverance." Just then, there was another knock at the door. The hospital administrator entered, looking flustered. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. The administrator's voice trembled slightly as she addressed Mr. Hale. "I understand there's been some concern about our hospital's practices. I assure you, we take these matters very seriously." Mr. Hale raised an eyebrow. "Do you? Because from what I've observed, the only thing taken seriously here is maintaining an outdated and discriminatory status quo." The administrator paled, clearly unprepared for such direct criticism. I'm not sure I understand. We have diversity initiatives in place." "Initiatives are not enough," Mr. Hale interrupted. "What you need is a complete overhaul of your hospital's culture, and that change starts at the top." Over the next few hours, Mr. Hale laid out his demands for change. He called for a thorough investigation into Brighton Medical Center's discriminatory practices, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, and a complete revamp of the hospital's hiring and promotion processes. "As for Dr. Roberts," Mr. Hale continued, his voice firm, "I expect his behavior to be thoroughly investigated. His actions weren't just unprofessional, they were discriminatory and potentially dangerous to patient care." The administrator, realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded numbly. "Of course, Mr. Hale, we'll begin implementing these changes immediately." As the day wore on, word spread throughout the hospital about Mr. Hale's true identity and the sweeping changes he was demanding. The atmosphere in the halls of Brighton was electric, a mix of fear, anticipation, and for some, hope. Maya, still processing everything that had happened, found herself at the center of attention. Colleagues who had once ignored or belittled her now approached her, some offering awkward apologies, others seeking her insight on the coming changes. As her shift ended, Maya made her way to Mr. Hale's room one last time. She found him sitting up, looking tired but satisfied. "Nurse Grant," he greeted her warmly. "I hope you don't mind, but I've recommended you for a position on the newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Your experiences and insights will be invaluable as we work to transform Brighton." Maya felt a surge of gratitude, hope, and renewed purpose. "Thank you, Mr. Hale," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Mr. Hale shook his head. "No, thank you, Nurse Grant. Your courage and professionalism in the face of adversity have been inspiring. You've reminded me why I got into healthcare in the first place, to make a difference in people's lives." As Maya left the hospital that evening, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she felt hopeful that real change was possible, not only for herself but for everyone at Brighton. That evening, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that a new chapter was beginning, not just for herself, but for Brighton Medical Center as a whole. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time since she'd started working there, she felt genuinely hopeful about the future. Little did she know that the changes set in motion that day would have far-reaching effects, not only at Brighton, but across the entire healthcare industry. The story of a determined nurse and an unexpectedly powerful patient was about to become a catalyst for change on a scale neither of them could have foreseen. In the days that followed, Brighton Medical Center was a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The revelation of Mr. Hale's true identity and his bold demands for change sent shockwaves through the entire institution. The hospital's once pristine facade had cracked, exposing the deeply rooted issues that had long festered beneath the surface. Early Monday morning, Maya arrived to find a flurry of activity. News vans were parked outside, and reporters clamored for statements from anyone willing to speak. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, with staff huddling in small groups, whispering anxiously. As Maya made her way to the nurse's station, she noticed Dr. Roberts being escorted to the administration office by security. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw a mix of anger and fear in his gaze before he was led away. "Maya," a voice called out. She turned to see Sarah, a nurse who had previously been cold toward her, approaching with an awkward smile. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how I treated you. I didn't realize." Maya nodded, accepting the apology, though unsure of how to respond. Before she could say anything, an announcement came over the hospital's PA system. All staff members are required to attend an emergency meeting in the main auditorium in 30 minutes. Attendance is mandatory. The auditorium was packed by the time Maya arrived, and she found a seat near the back, acutely aware of the curious glances and whispers that followed her. At the front, she spotted Mr. Hale, now dressed in a sharp suit despite the casts on his arms, speaking quietly with the hospital administrator and several other officials. As the room settled, Mr. Hale stepped up to the podium, his presence commanding immediate attention. The whispers faded into a tense silence. "Good morning," he began, his voice firm and authoritative. "For those who don't know me, I am Robert Hale, CEO of Healthcare United." "CEO of Healthcare United," Mr. Hale continued. "Over the past week, I've been a patient here at Brighton Medical Center, recovering from a skiing accident. During this time, I've had the opportunity to observe the daily operations and culture of this hospital." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "What I witnessed was deeply troubling. I saw a culture of discrimination, bias, and unprofessional behavior that has no place in modern healthcare." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some staff members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded in agreement. "Let me be clear," Mr. Hale continued, his voice steady. "The events I witnessed, particularly the treatment of Nurse Maya Grant, are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a systemic problem that has been allowed to persist for far too long." Maya felt all eyes turn to her. She sat up straighter, meeting the gazes of her colleagues with quiet dignity. Mr. Hale went on to outline the immediate changes that would be implemented. These included a thorough investigation into discriminatory practices, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, and a complete overhaul of the hospital's hiring and promotion processes. Furthermore, he added, his voice hardening, those found to have engaged in discriminatory behavior will face serious consequences. This includes Dr. Samuel Roberts, who has been suspended pending a full investigation into his conduct. Another wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Maya noticed some of Dr. Roberts' longtime supporters looking shocked and angry, while others seemed visibly relieved. "I know these changes may be difficult for some of you," Mr. Hale continued, "but let me be clear, this is not just about doing the right thing morally. It's about providing the best possible care for our patients. A diverse, inclusive, and respectful workplace leads to better outcomes for everyone." As Mr. Hale concluded, he made a final announcement that sent a jolt through the room. "Lastly," he said, "I want to introduce you to the person who will be leading many of these changes. Nurse Maya Grant has agreed to take on the role of Chief Diversity Officer at Brighton. Her experiences and insights will be invaluable as we work to transform this institution." Maya felt a mix of shock, pride, and nervousness wash over her as applause filled the room. She hadn't expected this announcement. She had only discussed joining the Diversity and Inclusion Committee with Mr. Hale. But as she rose and made her way to the front at Mr. Hale's beckoning, she saw the support in the faces around her and felt a powerful sense of purpose. As Maya stood at the podium, she could see a range of emotions on her colleagues' faces: surprise, respect, and in some cases, lingering resentment. Taking a deep breath, she began to address the room. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. To all of you, I want to say this. I stand here not as an adversary, but as a colleague who believes in the potential of Brighton Medical Center and everyone in this room. The road ahead won't be easy, but I'm committed to working alongside all of you to create a hospital where every staff member feels valued and every patient receives the best possible care, regardless of their background." As Maya spoke, she saw the impact of her words. Some colleagues nodded in agreement, others looked thoughtful, and even those who had been openly hostile seemed to be listening intently. After the meeting, Maya found herself surrounded by colleagues offering congratulations, apologies, and even tentative gestures of support. The atmosphere in the hospital had shifted dramatically. While tension and uncertainty still lingered, there was also a new, palpable sense of hope and possibility. As the day wore on, Maya worked alongside Mr. Hale and the hospital administration to start implementing the promised changes. The work was exhausting but exhilarating, and for the first time since joining Brighton, she felt she was truly making a difference. That evening, as she prepared to leave the hospital, she found Mr. Hale waiting for her near the exit. "Nurse Grant," he greeted her warmly, or should I say Chief Diversity Officer Grant, "how are you holding up?" Maya let out a tired laugh. "It's been quite a day, Mr. Hale. I'm still processing everything, to be honest." Mr. Hale nodded, understanding. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I want you to know I have full confidence in your ability to lead these changes. Your resilience and integrity are exactly what Brighton needs right now." As they walked out of the hospital together, Mr. Hale turned to Maya with a serious expression. "You should know, what's happening here at Brighton is just the beginning. I plan to implement similar changes across all of Healthcare United's facilities. Your story, Maya, has the potential to spark a revolution in how we approach diversity and inclusion in healthcare." Maya felt the weight of this responsibility settle on her shoulders, but rather than feeling burdened, she felt empowered. "I'm ready for the challenge, Mr. Hale. Together, we can make real lasting change," Mr. Hale said as he and Maya parted ways. Reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few days, Maya marveled at how much had transformed. From feeling isolated and nearly ready to give up, she now stood at the forefront of a movement that held the potential to transform not only Brighton Medical Center, but the entire healthcare industry. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and resistance from those opposed to change. Yet, as Maya looked back at the hospital, she felt a surge of determination. This was no longer just a job, it was a calling, a chance to ensure that no other healthcare professional would have to endure what she had. With renewed purpose, Maya set off into the evening, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. In the months following Mr. Hale's revelation, Brighton Medical Center underwent a dramatic transformation. Under Maya's leadership as Chief Diversity Officer, and with Mr. Hale's continued support, the once toxic culture began to shift toward inclusivity and respect. The mandatory diversity and inclusion training, initially met with resistance, gradually opened minds and changed hearts. After a thorough investigation, Dr. Roberts was dismissed from his position, sending a powerful message that discriminatory behavior would no longer be tolerated. As news of the changes at Brighton spread, Maya found herself in demand as a speaker at medical conferences and diversity seminars. 1 year after that pivotal day, she stood before a packed auditorium at a national healthcare conference. "A year ago," Maya began, "I was a nurse on the verge of giving up. Today, I stand before you as living proof that change is possible, that one voice can make a difference." She shared Brighton's story of transformation, not shying away from the challenges they had faced, but also highlighting the victories. The lives touched, the minds changed, and the culture shifted. After the conference, Mr. Hale, now fully recovered from his injuries, approached Maya with a warm smile. "Maya," he greeted her, "you've come a long way from the nurse I met a year ago." They discussed Brighton's progress and the ripple effects across the healthcare industry. Mr. Hale shared that several other hospitals in the Healthcare United network had started implementing similar programs. "You know, Maya," he said, "this journey has only just begun." When I first checked into Brighton after my skiing accident, I never could have imagined the journey it would set in motion, Mr. Hale said warmly. You've not only transformed Brighton, but you've also reignited my own passion for this work. As Maya prepared to return to the hospital, she reflected on her incredible journey, from an isolated, frustrated nurse to a leader and changemaker. She had come so far. The work was far from over, but Maya now felt a sense of hope and determination stronger than ever before. Arriving back at Brighton, Maya was greeted by Sarah, once a distant colleague, but now a strong ally. The hospital buzzed with fresh energy, staff members collaborating and communicating in ways they never had before. In the main lobby, Maya paused before a new mural depicting a diverse group of healthcare professionals working together. A plaque below read, "Diversity is our strength. Inclusion is our commitment. Compassion is our calling." As she settled into her office, ready to tackle new challenges, Maya smiled. The transformation of Brighton was just the beginning. The real work of changing hearts, minds, and entire systems lay ahead. But she was ready, committed to fighting for a truly inclusive healthcare system, one day at a time. What moment in Maya's journey resonated with you the most? Was it her perseverance in the face of discrimination, or perhaps Mr. Hale's unexpected intervention? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel. I pour my heart into crafting these heartwarming stories, and your support means the world to me. Thank you for joining me on this journey.